I found my new favourite place in the world when I landed in South Korea in 2010. I'd been working in a corporate job for far too long, and I'd always dreamed of doing some travelling and maybe even being able to live abroad at some point in my life. This was my first international trip where I was going further for longer than I had been before. I managed to score 6 weeks off at work as a kind of temporary hiatus, and I was going to use it to my full advantage to make sure I saw as much of the places I dreamed of going to for so long as I could. I planned to go to Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, but somehow I found myself in Korea and I didn't really have the urge to leave. There was something about it that really intrigued me like no other place ever had, and while I spent most of my time in Seoul, I also travelled to a few other parts of the country, each one opening up a different and exciting version of the world that I didn't even know existed. I'd always spent a lot of time researching that part of the world, reading books, doing online research, and envisaging what it would be like to actually be there. Being there was far different than imagining being there, and it was actually better, which doesn't usually happen, at least in my limited experience of trying to do something and it not being as exciting as I thought it would be. Seoul wasn't too expensive either. I'd expected it to be more in line with the prices in Japan, but that couldn't have been more wrong. Not that I made it to Japan to actually confirm this, at least yet, but I was quite shocked about how affordable certain things were, which made the whole thing even more memorable. The problem was, during those 6 weeks, I kind of fell into a rhythm, which I know is a typical sort of thing to say, but I was living in the moment, enjoying each and every single day, making friends with locals who seemed to all have grown up together with the rise of the country, and everyone was having better things because of how quickly things had progressed. I started to picture myself riding on that gravy train and being part of the country more than just a tourist who was going to spend 6 weeks there. It's strange how you can be attracted to certain places and certain things about a country, but Korea was the place where I wanted to be more than anywhere else in the world. At the time, I didn't know how to make that happen. I wanted it to happen, I just didn't know how. But I did start looking into the possibility of moving to Korea after I'd been there for a month. Pack in my corporate job, say goodbye to my old life, and move to Korea to begin a whole new chapter. Many exciting adventures along the way, many new things to do, and maybe when I grew old I could look back on that part of my life and be proud of myself for actually taking a chance and doing something that many people dreamed of doing, yet hardly anyone actually did. I promised myself, as soon as I returned home, I would do everything in my power to try to come up with a solution that could see me moving full-time to the amazing country of South Korea. When I left Korea, it felt like I was leaving home, going somewhere I didn't want to be going, and that's a really weird feeling to have because I'd never expected that I would love the country so much. At this point in time, I was 51 years old. I had reasonable savings, I suppose close to $200,000. This was from very hard work that I'd done over the course of my life. I was previously married but got divorced at 45. I had one child who at this point had just turned 23, so they were off doing their own thing, their own marvellous things. Life wasn't exactly how I pictured it being, and I suppose that's why I wanted to go and do some travelling. But now I didn't want to do travelling. I wanted to live in Korea. And I started looking into the options that would be available to me. While I was paid quite well at my current job, I did think that I could go to Korea temporarily as an English teacher, because that would allow me a route into the country. And while I might be taking some significant pay cut, I wasn't necessarily thinking that this was a bad thing, because I got to the point of thinking that life is for living, not for working every single hour with no end in sight. We're still in 2010 at this point of time, and it's often the case life gets in the way, and I'm thinking that I'm going to be moving to Korea soon. I want to move to Korea soon, but 2011 comes around and nothing's changed. 2012 comes around and still nothing's changed. but I'll look into this tomorrow. And then, instead of looking into it and researching what I would need to do, I knew what I needed to do, this was just an excuse. But I would be reading about the country, I'd be watching anything I could find about the country, yet not doing anything to get myself there, and I really hated myself for that. What happened next, though, was a very unfortunate turn of events that I was never expecting to happen. But that, in turn, gave me the ability to move to Korea without concern about money ever again. Both my parents tragically passed away in a very serious accident, and that was a huge low point of my life. They were both fit and healthy and enjoying life, and I looked up to them as being how I would have liked to have been when I was older, if my ex-wife hadn't divorced me. I was truly heartbroken when we found out about this. It was me and my two sisters. We were in shock when we found this out, and the way it happened as well was awful. That was right at the start of 2012, and we knew that our parents had some money, but we didn't know how much they had really, because that wasn't any of our business. And I would have given anything, even all my money that I had at this point, maybe $230,000, I would have given that to have them back. But it didn't work like that. I got an inheritance of about $800,000, and my sisters got the same, each, and I'd never seen that amount of money before. But it was money that just didn't feel good, but it was mine. It was legally mine. And I thought, in a way, I should honour my parents, and by that I'm going to move to Korea, follow my dreams, and make the most out of every single second I have, because we don't know when it's going to come to an end. When that money finally hit my account, I'd already quit my job with the idea of moving to Korea. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there, but I thought I would take it as it came. I wasn't really interested in following the teacher route anymore, but I was just going to go and spend as long as I could there without having to leave the country, and when the time came to leave, I would leave and go back again. I thought I would get to the point where I would make a decision, and I'm sure that there would have been a visa option available to me for long-term stay as and when the opportunity arose. Flying out that time to Korea, I hadn't been since my first time. I was really looking forward to arriving and beginning this new journey, but I still had a heavy heart because this was happening because of a tragic accident that happened to my beloved parents. And that really haunts me, even now. I felt great when I landed in the country, the same sense of wonder when I went through immigration and entered the country officially. Then went to the hotel that I booked, and from that moment on, I felt like my life only had one way to go. I got a 90-day entry when I arrived, and it was my plan to leave and come back and hope that I didn't have any problems with that until I came up with something better. I rented a great little apartment in Itaewon, and I began this new chapter. I was always on the lookout for things to do, for things to occupy my time, and I loved socializing with locals who were interested in learning about my culture, and I was able to pick up quite a lot of the language quite quickly, which I was very proud of. I was a bit of a night owl as well, you could say. Although I felt quite out of place at my age, I still liked to go to the clubs occasionally, maybe once a week, and it was just my way to relax and calm down after a day of thinking about all the possibilities of things I could do, and also thinking about where my life would be in the next 20 years. I wanted to take what I had and make my parents proud and turn it into even more. I wanted to be kind of like the start of a family empire, but I wasn't about to rush into anything, and I did come close though, after I'd been there for about 4 months. I had to leave one time, but I did come close to the idea of opening a bar, but I never got that far. I met a great Korean girl around this time, however that only lasted for 2 months. She was really great though, 45, and she was working at the head office of one of Korea's biggest companies. At this point, I'd stayed there for 6 months, and I had to leave again. That time I went to Japan for the first time ever just to see what it was like because I'd always wanted to go. I stayed there for a week and liked it, but it just reaffirmed my love for Korea even more than Japan, so I was glad to move to Korea. When I returned this time, I knew I was pushing it with the amount of times I was going to go in and out on 90-day stamps. I was thinking about what I would be able to do next. I guess I'd been back in Korea for probably 2 weeks when I was out at a club, and I ran into this great girl and I started speaking with her. I just thought she was from Korea like everybody else, but after I spoke to her, she said she was actually from Thailand and she was working in Korea. That really intrigued me because I'd never been to Thailand before and didn't really know anything about the country. She just said she was working there as a manager for some company, but I didn't really pay too much attention to that. It felt great to be able to have such a long conversation with her. She was 26 at the time, and I didn't stop to think that this was inappropriate in terms of the age gap because she was the one who approached me and started talking. There was no indication that she wanted any money from me, and that was never discussed or mentioned. I just thought that she'd taken an interest in me, and I was okay with that because I could take an interest in her as well. That evening we talked at length. I talked about my situation, how I was in Korea, but in still a bit of a limbo as to what I was going to do. And she went on to say that she'd been working in Korea for 2 years. Things are good for her and she's looking forward to saving up enough money to be able to go back to Thailand because she missed the country a lot. The way she talked about Thailand, it was like she held a deep love of the country, and I never really felt the same way about my own country. If I never had to go back, that would have been fine with me. And I guess we both got a little bit drunk that evening and somehow she went back to my place. Completely unexpected. But she was the one who initiated everything. This was not anything transactional. The following morning, I felt like I'd met someone who I wanted to get to know even more. She appeared to have the same sort of interest in me and we shared contact information. And I hoped that she would get in touch with me before I couldn't resist the urge to get in touch with her first. All my other thoughts kind of just vanished when I met her. What was I going to do in Korea? What was I going to do to make my parents proud? All of this was now me thinking, well, I want to go and see her again. I mean, that was across the first 2 days after I met her, and she reached out first saying, why haven't you messaged me? And I said, why haven't you messaged me? And then she said, I just have. So we arranged to meet up, and we did this for another 2 or 3 weeks, just casually getting to know each other. And each time she told me more about Thailand, and I started to think that I would like to go for a visit, even if it wasn't with her. I'd love to go and see what it was all about. When I was approaching the end of my 90-day stay, I knew I needed to leave and try to come back again. And at this point, I did consider her to be my girlfriend, and I would usually see her in the evenings because she said she was at work. When I told her that I needed to leave the country, go somewhere else before I can come back, and I was thinking about Thailand, how would she like to go with me? She said she would love to, and it was agreed that we'd go together. This was about a week before I needed to leave, so I booked tickets for both of us. I'm paying for everything when we're going out and everything like that because that was expected, even though she was working. And she came to my place the day before we were due to fly to Thailand. That evening, when she arrived, I was really excited about things. But she had a bit of a strange demeanour about her, and I asked her what was wrong. She said that she had something to tell me, and if I was upset or angry, that was fine. She was sorry, and she would leave. I had no idea what she meant when she said that, just thinking that she changed her mind or something and she didn't want to go. If that was the case, well, so be it. I'll go myself. But she was just about to say something, and then she started crying, saying it's very difficult to talk about. And I was getting a bit concerned because I started having all these feelings for her and now she's upset in front of me, and I didn't want to see it. So I just told her, you can say anything, it's fine. She said she hadn't really told me the truth when we met. She said she didn't work as a manager for a business. She said she came to Korea to do farm work, but she didn't like it. So she started working, how she put it, like I would in a bar in Thailand, but not in a bar. I didn't really know what she meant by that, so she had to explain it in a bit more detail, and then I finally understood what she was trying to say. She said she was very sorry that she didn't tell me, but she didn't think that she would actually like me as much as she did. She felt embarrassed about it, and she'd been doing that for about a year before we met. She said, it's okay, I'll go now, I'm so sorry. I was very alarmed. I never thought that that would be who she was. I never thought about it, but I could clearly see she was upset and embarrassed, And for whatever reason, I just said to her, don't worry about it. As long as we're together and you don't do that anymore, then it's not really going to be a problem. Let's see how we get on together in Thailand and we'll take it as it comes. I chose to look at it like she was just a down-to-earth girl who got caught up in hard times, and because of that, she did some things that she wasn't proud of. That's how I looked at it. Maybe a wiser and more worldly person would have looked at it as the exact opposite of that, but I just chose to ignore it and forget about it because I was starting to have feelings for her, and I was looking forward to going to see Thailand for the first time, and I was looking forward to be doing that with her and actually spending real time together as opposed to seeing each other regularly. She said, "Thank you so much for being so kind and understanding." And then she said she thought I was really special, and because of that, let's just get on with the rest of the evening. And we did. And the following day we were due to fly to Bangkok. I had no idea what to expect because I'd never spent even a single second researching Thailand. All I knew about Thailand is what people joked about back at home. The bars. That was what everyone seemed to talk about, and the nightlife. And I suppose the fact that the girl that I was with just admitted to being similar to that, perhaps the stereotypes of Thailand were true. But if so, that would be it. I was going in with a completely open mind, and I couldn't wait. Thailand was nothing like I expected it to be. From the moment we landed at Suvarnabhumi Airport with the modern infrastructure, high-rises as far as the eye could see, expensive cars littering the highways, and that insatiable heat that you can only feel very rarely in Korea, if ever. The thing that I noticed the most was how she looked when we were there. She looked so much more relaxed and calm and collected in a way, like she didn't have any pressure on her anymore. She was in her own country, and I could tell that that meant something to her. I booked a ticket to actually be in Thailand for a whole month, because the way she described it, it did seem to be a place I wanted to get to know. The plan was to spend the first few days in Bangkok, and after that, just take it as it came, and I would follow her lead because she was a local and she knew where the best places to go were. I wanted to be in her hands. She talked about wanting to go and visit her family. They were living in a province called Miserably, but she went on to talk about how it would be inappropriate for me to go with her because we weren't married. That took a bit of getting my head around, given her situation, but it was fine with me. I could stay in a hotel in the city where she was from, and she described it as a village quite a far out of the centre. The first few days in Bangkok were a very eye-opening experience. All those things that I heard about Thailand, while you could see them and they were all in plain view pretty much all over the place, there was so much more to Thailand than that. You would get onto the BTS SkyTrain in the morning and see all the workers in their suits going to their jobs, living normal lives. I did, I think, picture Thailand as some kind of brothel before I arrived, based on all the stereotypes that I'd heard throughout my life. But it was so much more than that. A very memorable experience was when we went down the Chao Phraya River on a little boat and saw a lot of the city that way, and that was special. And then, during the course of the next month, I was introduced to Pattaya. It wasn't my favourite place, but I really did like certain things about it, and I started to think it would be a great place to live. We also went to Phuket. I suppose everyone's heard of that. And also a town to the north called Chiang Mai. Then we went to her city, and I spent a few days in the hotel while she went to see her family, and then after that it was just a question of going back to Korea. I felt at this moment like I was really fortunate to have been to Thailand with her, and I also felt a really deep connection to her that I hadn't felt ever since I got married for the first time. And when it was time to go back to Korea, she said to me that she had something to say. I can't go back to Korea because when I was there, I overstayed my visa. That might have been why she wanted to go through a separate immigration crew from the one that I was using when we were leaving, but I didn't think about that. She said, I have to stay in Thailand, so if you want to go, I understand. I decided there and then that I was going to stay in Thailand with her. I could always go back to Korea at a later date if I wanted to, but I wanted to see where things would go between me and her because they seemed to be going very well so far. Initially, we rented a place in Bangkok, and I was still on the lookout for things to do as I was in Korea, but I never got that far. I found it very easy though to stay in Thailand. All I needed to do was transfer some money into a bank account that I opened and I could get a retirement visa and extension, and I could do that indefinitely. That was very easy, because I didn't even have a proper visa sorted out in Korea. We spent 3 months in Bangkok. At this point, we're living together all the time, and it's getting to the stage where I can't think of my life without her. I'm still looking out for things to do, and she knows that I'm looking for things to do. And I decided after 3 months that I was wanting something a bit more laid back than Bangkok as a place to live. And that also coincided with an idea that I had to open a restaurant close to the beach in Jon in Pattaya. We went down to Pattaya 2 or 3 times during those 3 months, and every time I was there, I just liked the feel of it. If you kind of averted your gaze to all the seedy side of it, it was actually a really nice city. I was drawn towards the Jon area, and the idea to have a restaurant there kept coming up to me all the time, and my girlfriend thought that that would be a good idea as well. When we left Bangkok for Pattaya, we didn't have anything lined up. Nothing was sorted out, nothing was set in stone. It was just some kind of restaurant in some kind of location quite close to the beach. If anything else came up, that would be good as well. But I thought it was about time, after I'd been out of my country for about a year now, that I did something and start putting my money to use. I hadn't spent a lot of money since I was in Korea, and I guess I didn't really need to do anything because I spent what my money had generated. And because of that, it would have been easy to just do nothing. But when I moved to Korea initially, my idea was to do something all along, and it just seemed that if I did it in Thailand instead, that would be just as easy. In fact, it should be easier, because I could already live in Thailand without having to leave the country ever again. And I had a local girlfriend who at this point I'm in love with, and I felt like I had a local connection, which made things even easier yet again. We moved to Pattaya, rented a place in Jon, a really great condominium unit, only 1 bedroom, but it was quite big 1 bedroom. And the day we moved in, that was when I asked her to marry me, because I felt like that she was my soulmate. She agreed, she seemed happy about it, and over the course of the next 3 months, we went to get married in her village, did everything to make her family happy, and also got married at the local district office, and she changed her name to mine, which made me feel amazing. We went away together for 2 weeks, had a good time, returned to Pattaya, and I was on the lookout for a business opportunity. I had just under $1 million to my name, and by the time I was 60, I wanted to have 5 times that. That was my target, and I wanted to go big, I wanted to go hard, and I wanted to build a successful business in Thailand. The first thing I did was look into the legal side of things. As a foreigner, what I would need to do to operate a business in Thailand. I used an agent to start a company before we even knew exactly what we were doing. I owned 49% of it, and my wife and one of her other family members owned the rest. My wife basically owned all of it and just a token amount belonging to someone else, as we needed 3 shareholders. That was the company formed, and then the work permit and visa I could delay to a later date, when we found something to do. As I've already mentioned, I was always drawn to the idea and drawn to the beach around Jon. While the beachfront places all seemed to be taken and expensive at the time, just down some of the sois, if you know Chonburi immigration, all the sois around that area, where they had a lot of bars. But I was more interested in opening up a restaurant and employing staff and maybe serving Western food. While there was an abundance of that there already, always seemed to be more room. Really good quality Western style food at great prices. My wife and I started looking around for different premises. How much would it cost to rent, what we needed, what would all the costs be, and it can't have even been a month after we formed the company when we actually found a location that was for sale. It was expensive because of the location given where it was, but it was just something about the idea of owning this prime piece of property that we could also run a business from. There were businesses all around. It was priced at 18 million baht, a 4-story shop house about 100 meters away from the main Jon Beach Road, and it was perfect for what we were wanting. It wasn't tucked away down some back alley. This was prime location, and I was tempted to just say let's buy it straight away, but I knew I needed to take my time and make sure that this was the right idea. It was very run down inside, so it would need a lot of money spending on it. But when I thought about how much I had, what I was thinking in terms of a plan moving forwards would be to get this place renovated, open our business there, start generating income, start generating profits, and then use what money I had left to buy another place, maybe with a small mortgage, and do that again. Pay the mortgage off and get to the point, hopefully, by the age of 60, where we'd have 5 or 6 places that we owned outright around Pattaya. It was quite exciting to think about, and we actually went away for a week to think about it long and hard as to whether this would be the best idea. After consulting with my agent, after thinking about it with my wife, we both decided that we should take advantage of this opportunity and purchase it. I agreed to pay 18 million baht, plus half the transfer taxes each, and this was going to be going into my wife's name. I had to sign some documentation at the land office, but I just thought that was par for the course. We could have put it into the name of the company, but that would have been difficult. I'd heard many people having problems about buying property in the names of companies before, and I didn't want that to happen to me. I was only quite new in Thailand, mind you, so I wanted to do everything properly. We purchased that in my wife's name, and then my wife leased the property to our company. And over the next 4 months, I spent another 3 million baht completely renovating this place and turning it into a fantastic restaurant. We employed 8 staff, and we didn't have any rent to pay for the business, so I was hoping that that would give us a big advantage over the businesses that did have to pay rent. I suppose at this point I had about $300,000 left. I'd already got my work permit and got a marriage extension because that was easier than getting a business extension, and I felt amazing that I was doing something so exciting in such an amazing place, in an amazing country, all because I'd met an amazing girl in Korea. When we opened, our total monthly expenditure for all our staff, the utilities, legal fees, accountancy fees, and all the stock, everything that we needed to pay for, was coming to approximately 300,000 baht a month. That might sound like a lot, but we were in a key area with so many people passing by. It didn't seem like it would be a lot to make that. When we did open, it was an amazing feeling. I'd been wanting to do something for such a long time now when I'd done it, and we owned the place we were doing it from, and it felt like we really had our own slice of it as opposed to just transitioning through. The first month we brought in about 220,000. Not bad considering it was the first month. And that steadily happened over the next few months to the point where we were breaking even and all our costs were being covered. I mean, this is also for the wage I needed to pay for myself, for my work permit by the way, as well as the wage for my wife that she was getting. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough when I said 300,000. That was for our wages as well. When high season came, we did quite well and made good money. It's an awful lot of hard work. We were there 7 days a week. Any time the chef didn't show up, it was stressful and difficult, and we had to go through quite a few chefs before we found one that was really reliable, but that was just teething issues of a normal new business. I was very happy with the decision that we'd made. It was around this time that because it was successful, we decided to buy our own place to live. My wife was able to get a mortgage on a really nice new development house, about 15 minutes away from the business. That was priced at 6 million baht, and we only needed to put down 1 million. The mortgage payments were going to be approximately 32,000, but we could pay it off quicker if we wanted to. I guess I probably invested another 1 million baht to make the house perfect inside, and we also bought a car for the first time for another 1 million, and that's coming out of my savings, but it's not a concern because the business is going well and we're happy together. If I thought at the time we would be in that position when I was in Korea, I wouldn't have even thought that that was real. We had a great house, a great business, and we were married, and I was doing everything legally in Thailand, and all I was thinking about was getting the next place, and a place after that, and somewhere after that. Maybe doing a bar next as opposed to a restaurant, because at this point, when you've been there for a long time, you start to get numb to all the bars that you see around you, and I most definitely was starting to get numb to it, thinking we should have our bar as well. In terms of what we had left, I would say it was probably around $250,000, and our income that we were both getting together out of the business is around 100,000 baht. And I think we were making a profit of around 30 to 40,000 a month, at least in high season, and that was staying in the business. This seemed to be really exciting, and I can't believe that things are going so well. I have to keep stressing that because they were going so well. I'm so happy, and I just wanted to continue. I wanted to expand. I always keep thinking about expansion as opposed to perhaps preserving what we have. It's always about more, 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 because I always had the idea of having 5 places by the time I was 60. I don't know why 5, why not 4, why not 6, but I just felt like we could really solidify my place in the country. It was around this time I made a silly mistake and decided to buy a really nice car. Both my wife and I had great credit given the fact that the business was going well and we already had a car that I spent $1 million on. I really wanted a Mercedes C-Class. This one was going to cost $3 million, so I put $1 million down and got the rest on finance for 4 years. And it was quite a big payment, but we could afford it and it felt great to be able to drive around Pattaya in such a nice car. I mean, such a nice car for Thailand. It was just a normal saloon car back in Europe, but still, for Thailand it was nice. And then we just lived well for the next 3, 4, 5 months, everything's going well, and I'm still keeping an eye out for other opportunities that might come our way. Then, a building came up for sale, not too far away from ours. It was quite a bit smaller, but it would be ideal for a bar because it was already a bar. And it seemed like if we could pay down 30%, which I could afford, could get a mortgage for the rest, a quick mortgage, not over a long period of time, and if things continued doing as they were, the bar brought in as much money as we expected it to, with a big margin for error that I said, which I always thought was sensible. It could be paid off in 4 or 5 years, and then from there, we could look at doing something more. I didn't take a step back to think that this was a big risk. I was just thinking it would have been a risk not to, because I'm thinking in 4 years' time, 5 years' time, we can have 2 paid off buildings in prime locations. And then we could use that as collateral for the next one, given the fact that we're going to be making 2 great amounts of profits from 2 places. I did start to think maybe, though, at this point, that 3 maximum was going to be more likely the possibility instead of 5. But I was thinking that if we had 3, when we're retired, we could sell the businesses that we've got, take key money in terms of someone taking over the lease, and then we can have people renting these places from us. And that could be giving us $250,000 a month, if we had 3 places. I'm thinking long term here, and that's how my mind was working. When I raised this with my wife, the possibility to open a bar, she thought it was a good idea. It would be different to running a restaurant, but again, if we owned a place, it would be different. I was thinking that if you rented somewhere, it would still be $1 million baht just to take over the lease. So if this one we could get for 13 million, 3 million down, I'd still have $100,000 left, and it could put us on the path to exactly where I wanted to be. We didn't just jump straight in at the deep end with this. We spent a while thinking about it, but we did decide that it was what we wanted to do, and we were approved for the mortgage. I should say my wife was approved for the mortgage, given the fact that we had our company and we could show the turnover and how well it was going, and just like that, we were now the proud owners of a bar. We did spend a bit of money doing some renovation work, but told the girls that worked there when we bought it that they can remain, and things started out like they were going okay. I suppose I should have paid a lot closer attention to the fact that all these outgoings that we were having were quite extreme, and I only had $100,000 left. A lot of money, but not when things start to go wrong on such a big scale. But things weren't going wrong, things were going great, and during the first 3 months of opening the bar, which was high season of that particular year, we managed to pay off a whole $1 million baht on the mortgage that we had on the building. Everything was going well, and then low season happened, and the outgoings ballooned and the takings plummeted to such a level that I didn't even calculate this to be a possibility. But it did feel like we could weather the storm and wait for the next high season, pay down as much of the mortgage as we could, and get to the point where we could have a great retirement by the time I was 60. It was around March of that year when it became apparent that I'd over-leveraged by quite a considerable amount. Our monthly outgoings in total, for everything, every single thing that we needed to pay for, were approximately 1 million baht. But in March of that year, we brought in 600,000. That was over a $10,000 loss, the same in April and May and June, and my 100,000 had turned into 50,000. So I guess it was more than 10,000 a month across those 4 months. July was a bit better, as was August, but still it got to the point where we had to sell the car that we didn't have a loan on. We got 700,000 for that, around $20,000, which would help, and we hadn't paid anything extra on the mortgage on the building. The mortgage on our house, we were not paying to pay anything extra on as well, and we were just paying minimal payments, which was never the intention, and the car as well. It's a lot, and I suppose we should have sold the car that we had the finance on instead of the one we didn't, but that wouldn't have given us any money. We just kept pushing until high season, and when that came around, things went well again. Yet I wasn't able to replace my savings for the next year if anything went wrong. What we were able to do was pay off a little bit extra on the mortgage on the building where the bar was, but still, there was a lot of money outstanding on it, and we needed to think about what we were going to do when low season hit because the outgoings were going to be so high and we didn't really have the money to cover it anymore if things went wrong. I talked about selling the car to my wife, saying we didn't really need it, but she hated the idea. She had grown accustomed to driving around in a nice Mercedes, so that was something that we had to keep. I talked about selling the house, getting rid of that mortgage, but that was something that was going to be difficult because we couldn't sell that house easily because it was Thailand, and you can't just sell a house like you can in many countries. It takes time, and it could often be a long time before it would happen. But the biggest outgoing was the mortgage we had on the bar. We didn't take it for very long, so it's like a huge amount of money every month. But still, there was a long time outstanding on it, and I was scratching my head thinking what we needed to do to work something out. I wasn't getting overly concerned, I was just getting a bit stressed. I think that's the right thing to say, because it's like we were so close to having 2 paid off buildings, but then again we weren't, because we were millions and millions of baht away from having 2 paid off buildings, and that made it a little bit more difficult when you actually think about the numbers involved. We flew straight into the next low season with hope more than anything else, but again, things were not going great. And at this point, I don't have any savings left. I mean, no savings whatsoever. And then we had payments due on the mortgage for the house, the car, the building, and then there was nothing to cover it. That's when you realize that your grand visions were nothing more than idiotic visions. Idiotic visions of something that perhaps were too unrealistic. Deep down, I really wanted to own the entire town. I wanted every single building. I wanted every single person who had a business or who lived somewhere to pay me money in rent. So I thought that by getting an extra building it wouldn't make much of a difference, because it was only tiny in the grand scheme of things. I knew that vision wasn't realistic, but that was my ultimate dream. But now we were faced with payments that needed making in a few weeks' time and we didn't have the money to pay for it. We had to sell the car. Didn't have any choice. After covering most of the finance, we only got 100,000 baht out of it, but it did reduce our payments marginally, even though that was the smallest one we had. That money was just eaten up, and then we had to go to the bank and explain the situation, asking if we could defer until high season. They had 2 choices. They could either say no and that would cost them money, or they could say yes and hopefully get to high season and make enough to pay everything that we owed and keep going. And we did put our house up for sale as well. I actually asked the bank about getting another loan on the building that was completely paid off. It wasn't like we didn't have anything. We had all this money tied up in these places, but they refused. And somehow we managed to agree terms where we would pay as soon as we could. But if we couldn't, then it would come to a point where they would repossess, sell it at a knockdown price, or we might not get anything out of it. Somehow, we managed to get an offer on our house. I mean, we sold it at a huge knockdown just so we could avoid the payments that we needed to make. It was only our priority to keep hold of the buildings, which would be our retirement. I put down 1 million baht in that. We'd probably paid off about 200,000 of the principal, plus the 1 million I invested. But we sold it at a knockdown rate and ended up getting back about 50,000, just to get rid of the monthly payments that we had. And it made a small difference. And now, though, we're just concerned about making the payments for the bar, which were approximately 150,000 a month. Together with all the other outgoings that we managed to reduce, it was now around 800,000. That was for everything. And takings still weren't close enough during low season. But by high season, things pick up again, and we managed to pay back money that we owed. And at this point, we were living in a room at the top of the restaurant because it was the best way to save money. One thing that I did notice around this time, when we had to sell the car and the house, that was when my wife started to behave really irrationally, as if she was pinning the blame on me while we both did this together, and we both came to these decisions in agreement. But it was as if it was my fault when I never thought it was. I just thought that we were a little bit unlucky because it could have turned out differently. And I was still thinking when this second building was paid off, that would still be an amount of money that I'd invested. But at this point, I suppose I'd lost about 30% of what I had, but I expected to get it back eventually. This had been going on a few years now, and the following low season just happened to be particularly difficult. and it got to the point where we couldn't continue making payments on the bar. So we tried to sell the building quickly, but we couldn't get any offers on it. And it got to the point where we couldn't work out anything with the bank, so it was repossessed. That was a low point. We should get money back if they sold it, get back what we put into it, but they sold it for quite a lot less than we paid for it, which meant that I didn't get anything out of it. I didn't even know how they were allowed to do that. That was gut-wrenching when it happened, because that was meant to be number 2 out of many. As I already said, I wanted the whole town. But instead, the bank took it, sold it at a fire sale, got their money back, and I didn't get anything back. And again, I still didn't know how they were allowed to do that. They should have waited until they could get the proper price for it, and they could have kept accruing interest, I suppose, but we didn't get anything out of it. Now, I've got no money whatsoever. We've got the restaurant in the building there, and that's making a profit even in low season, but it's only enough to cover basic salaries, and there's nothing there that we can use to thrust out and get more, which is what the whole purpose of this thing was. Life is collapsing around me. My wife and I are not really on speaking terms anymore, and I just don't understand how it got so bad. It could have been so good, and it was meant to be so good, but things were just going from bad to worse to downright miserable. And the fact that we still had, I suppose, more than half of my money left in this building, it felt like an empty shell of what it was meant to be. I just lost half my money in the space of a few years, and again, my wife is pinning all the blame on me. Instead of us both being grateful for the fact that we still had something, we started fighting all the time because our lifestyle had dropped dramatically. From the nice car, the nice house, owning 2 businesses, to now owning 1 business. And we were living in a small room at the top of that, which hadn't been renovated to the quality of the downstairs area. It's still making money, and it's still bringing profits to us. We can live on it, but it's so far away from what I'd envisaged that I'm getting so depressed, and my wife is getting angry because she can no longer drive around in a car, no longer take pictures of herself in a house and on the car and show it to people. And I always like to go back and tell her, "Can you remember where we met? You've got so much better than you had then. Why can't you compare now to then? Why do you have to compare now to what we had a year ago?" But she was always comparing herself to other people who had more than her instead of who had less than her. And we're not on speaking terms, just existing on a day-to-day basis. And it's a really bad existence. Nothing like I expected my life to be. We've downsized, we've downgraded, and I've lost probably $400,000 at this point. I couldn't believe it. I was meant to be making money. I was meant to be increasing my net worth. I was meant to be building an empire to make my parents proud. But instead, they'd probably be turning in their graves at the knowledge of the ridiculous things that I've done, just trying to get ahead in the world. At the time, I didn't think they were ridiculous. And I mean now, it was a calculated risk, but I got it wrong. I got it very wrong, and we over-leveraged, buying things that we didn't need instead of first making sure that the businesses were 100% solid. We could have existed with everything apart from the second place, or we could have probably weathered the storm and kept the second place if we hadn't bought a house and a car and other things that we didn't need to spend money on. It was lifestyle inflation, I think, that got the better of me, before I was in a place to take advantage of it. I was inflating my own lifestyle when I shouldn't have been, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. And now my wife refuses to acknowledge that she used to be a common lady working illegally in Korea. She now sees herself as the wife of a businessman who was let down and who has had her very existence removed away from her. And that was the point in time when my wife decided it would be a good idea to have an affair with somebody. You would think that she would go and have an affair with someone with a lot more money because that's what she thought she should have had, but no. She went to have an affair with this Thai guy that she used to know in her village, who was still working on the farm. He had nothing, and that made the whole thing even more degrading and worse. Now it's like we don't want to be together anymore. Everything's going wrong. The building belongs to her, but I can show that I funded it. Then it's going to be a lengthy legal battle and we've got to sell the place. It might not sell for a long time, and if we do, what we're going to do in the meantime? It's a really awful situation, and it's all coming crashing down so quickly, which makes the whole thing even worse. I bit off a lot more than I could chew in Thailand, and now things would get a lot worse for me. I mean a lot worse. When I went to the agent that I used to help with everything in terms of the company, told them of the predicament and the fact that we were no longer together. I said I wanted to get half of the value of the building because that seemed to be realistic, and I knew cases where foreigners had managed to do that. But the agent, who also was there when we purchased the property because I wanted to have legal representation, told me that I signed that bit of paper that said that the money used to buy the place was her personal property, not mine. I'm going to have to prove somehow that it was actually a loan to her, or something along those lines, and at the time, we hadn't set anything up like that. There's no paper trail to say that this was a loan, or that this was anything other than a gift, because I'd signed that at the land office. I've heard of cases where foreigners had successfully got half their stuff out of this, but now it looked like she was going to keep everything and I'd lost all my money. I went to seek advice from a really good lawyer who confirmed that that was the case. He said you could take it to court, it could go in your favour, but what he recommended was trying to come to some kind of arrangement with my wife so that we could avoid this lengthy legal process, and it might involve me getting a lot less than half. And if that was going to be the case, then you'd have to go for it. Where was she going to get money from too? She couldn't borrow money against it to give you any, because the other place was repossessed and her credit was ruined. So it was just a question of seeing what we could do. I sought as much advice as I could, and at this moment in time the business is running and we're both getting incomes out of it, but we're not on speaking terms and we're not living together. I don't have any other money to my name to be able to fight a legal battle. She doesn't have any other money to fund a legal battle, and if we close the business to sell the property, then both of us are not going to get any income anymore, and both of us are not going to be able to live. It's a very difficult situation that we're in, and I needed to know what my wife's intentions were, because we'd already decided we weren't going to stay together, but we hadn't discussed anything. I got my lawyer to call her and find out what she planned to do. This was after I found out about her affair, and she just said that it's her building and she wants it. She's not going to share it with me. And then obviously the lawyer informed her that I would take her to court and it could end up costing us both more than 1 million baht each. He advised offering something just to avoid this legal battle, and she didn't really say anything and it was just a waiting game. I'm living in a very small condo, not going back to the business, and she's in this business with this Thai guy who was working on the farm. Now he's a business owner. After all was said and done, after all discussions, after lots of back and forth, it was determined that the place would be sold, to avoid going to court, and I would have to accept 4 million. I should have been due 9 if we sold it for 18, but I was going to be given 4, and that was it. The problem was, though, I didn't have any money to live there because we had to close the business because of this. It wasn't possible to keep running and selling it at the same time, because we didn't want to sell the business, we wanted to sell the building. So I had to return home while this was going on, and about 8 months later, it sold. It actually sold for just under 16 million, and because of that I got a little bit less than 4, maybe around the equivalent of $100,000 out of it. I basically wasted everything I had, and at this point in time I'm working again. I'm living in an awful place that I don't want to live in, doing a job that I thought I'd escaped from, and I hated the day that I ever went to Thailand. I should have stayed in Korea. I should have heard the fact that she used to work like that when she met me and run for the hills, but I didn't do that. I destroyed my life in Thailand, and I get that this is my personal fault. But still, she didn't have any excuse to change when things went wrong. All she needed to do was act the same, understand it was bad for both of us, and we could have continued that business, maybe sold the business or rented out the building and retired. But she didn't want to do that. She wanted what she had become accustomed to having, and I do take a little bit of solace in the fact that out of the money that she got, she doesn't have any of it left because she blew it all. I think she's now living back up on the farm, and I'm in a position where I might be able to try to do something else again after over 6 or 7 years of really difficult work and mental anguish. Be careful if you go to Thailand. I was so close to success, but failure reared its ugly head.